Our lesson of Scripture this morning comes to us from the book of Deuteronomy. I'll be reading from chapter 6, verses 10 through 19. Hear now the reading of God's holy word. When the Lord your God has brought you into the land that he swore to your ancestors, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give you a land with fine large cities that you did not build, houses filled with all sorts of goods that you did not fill, hewn cisterns that you did not hew, vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. And when you have eaten your fill, take care that you do not forget the Lord, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. The Lord your God you shall fear, him you shall serve, and by his name alone you shall swear. Do not follow other gods, any of the gods of the peoples who are all around you. Because the Lord your God, who is present with you, is a jealous God. The anger of the Lord your God would be kindled against you, and he would destroy you from the face of the earth. Do not put the Lord your God to the test, as you tested him at Massah. You must diligently keep the commandments of the Lord your God, and his decrees, and his statutes, that he has commanded you. Do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, so that it may go well with you, and so that you may go in and occupy the good land that the Lord swore to your ancestors to give you, thrusting out all of your enemies from before you, as the Lord has promised. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
I never can remember. The lesson I selected for Mike to read this morning.
Double check, Sean.
Pardon?
I said you just need to double check it.
Do I? Oh.
No, are you saying I didn't read the wrong one again?
No, the lesson I selected for you to read this morning, which was the one I intended to select, is a passage that was very important to the Hebrew people. Recorded their exodus from Egypt and the commandments and requirements that were laid upon them as they went into the promised land. And it was a reminder that the place they were going to was a land that was going to be a better place than the one they had left. It was important to the Hebrew people then. Truth of the matter is, in the first couple of our centuries, it was very important to a number of the immigrants who came to these shores because in ways, religious ways, they looked upon themselves as a new people of God who were looking for a new Israel to settle where they could worship God in the way that was commanded in the Scriptures. And with their Bibles in hand and that passage close by, they came. They came from everywhere, and they came in a constant stream. Unfortunately, the place was already inhabited by the original Americans, and as is true with every colonizing people that come in, the natives who were here were treated horribly. To top it off, they got here and instituted practice of slavery, which worked well for a couple hundred years. Then all of a sudden, it didn't work anymore, and we fought a civil war, bloodiest conflict in our nation's history, which really didn't solve the problem of slavery, got rid of the institution of slavery, But when you have a couple hundred years to get used to something and are told that it's a good thing, the thought process and the heart process very often are very slow in following the political solution. The people who came here had hopes and dreams. The people who came here, as is true anytime you put people in any setting, they brought their own set of problems, because human nature, when there are enough of us in the mix, you're going to get some human problems. But one of the things about America is that we have a way of finally getting around to dealing with problems. It may take a while, but if things are wrong, we will work on fixing them. And this country is on almost everybody's short list anywhere in the world they find themselves as one of the places they would come to in a heartbeat, given the choice. And that's an important thing for us to remember. It's especially important for those to remember who are hypercritical of our country, who for several things that are wrong condemn it largely and loudly. It's also important for those to remember who are hyper-approving of anything that goes on in America simply because it is America. We're headed in a good direction, but we're not done yet. If my favorite TV game show, Family Feud, had been on back in olden colonial times, picture this. Steve Harvey, he'd be wearing knickers and a tri-cornered hat, would come out and would start the game, and he would have the first face-off, and somebody would win it, and they'd say, we're going to play. So he would start down the line. In a survey of what reasons Americans give for coming here, what are they? And then he would start down the line of the family, and somebody would say free land, somebody would say making it big, somebody would say escaping all the bad debt I left back in Europe, somebody would say elbow room, and when the round was over, there would still be one of those little blocks that wasn't turned over, and that would be the number one reason. And you know how Steve does it. He says we have number one reason is still out there. Flip it over, and everybody in the place calls out freedom. The right to be free is the cornerstone of the Declaration of Independence. The Constitution was put together in such a way as to provide the best safeguards of keeping freedom as part of who we are, and the Bill of Rights was passed to protect our freedoms. 2 decades after our revolution, the French came along and they fought a revolution of their own. Victor Hugo wrote about it definitively in his book, Les Miserables. Andrew Lloyd Webber took his book and brought that epic story to the Broadway stage in his production of Les Mis. You remember there's a song they sing twice. Once they sing it on the barricades in the streets of Paris on the night of the climactic battle, and then it comes back as the final chorus that's sung when the curtain rises and everybody who has died in the struggle for freedom sort of reunites in this great chorus to end the play. Will you be strong and join with me? Will you stand in our crusade? Somewhere beyond the barricade, there's a land you long to be. Kind of sums it up. A lot of people came here for that very reason, because they looked around them in Europe and they couldn't find that place in the time in which they lived, and they heard the stories and they followed the dream across the ocean. Freedom. Franklin Roosevelt made a speech somewhere in the course of the Second World War, defined the four freedoms as a reminder of what we were truly fighting for. Freedom of speech, freedom to worship, freedom from want, freedom from fear. In my family, the move for freedom was made in the year 1709. There was a little lady named Mary Ferree. She lived in Protestant portion of France. And her reason for coming over here was to flee the bloodshed of the 30-Year War. What's the 30-Year War? The 30-Year War was a war between the Catholics and the Protestants of Europe that lasted 30 years. You know how many people you can kill in 30 years? You can kill a lot of people. It was, in that time, pretty much the equivalent of what is going on in the Middle East today between the two factions of the Islamic religion. It was people who believed in the same God, but who thought the other group would be better off dead. And all the men in the family were killed, and here's poor Mary. She's got 3 boys and a girl, and there's not another adult male left alive. And so she says, got to be something better. So she picks up her family, heads to England, and in England she hears about a colony in America that is founded by a fellow named William Penn. A very different kind of colony, because this colony is founded on the principles of toleration and religious freedom, which in Europe of that day was pretty much unheard of. And she thought, you know, that's just the place we need to go. And so the next year she came to America, went to his colony, Pennsylvania, went to the county of Lancaster, and found some empty land that nobody had claimed, and it was available. And so she said, we're going to live here. You can almost hear her 4 children. Mama, there is nothing out here. This place doesn't even have a name. And she said, well, I'll give it a name. We'll call it Paradise. And you can almost hear the children saying back, Mama, this place doesn't look anything like paradise. And you can almost hear her answering them, never you mind, it will. And that's how the town of Paradise, Pennsylvania got its name. There are times in life that you've just got to give something a name It can be a place, it can be something else, and hope, in the hope that it will grow into whatever name you give it. There's a little community down in the Piedmont called Gold Hill. It was named by some hopeful miners. A little crowd moved up in Pennsylvania and established a town which they chose to name Florida, Pennsylvania. They must have spent one bad winter. Have you ever been through Prosperity, South Carolina? Didn't happen, did it? But they were hopeful, and so they gave it a name in the hope that their life there would be something that would live in to the name that they gave it. And some of those folks who came here before us succeeded in marvelous ways. And others got not incredible success, but they had enough good fortune that it made the risk well worthwhile. And some who came fell victim to the misfortunes of life over here before they could ever get enough traction for some of the good things to happen. But those people, individually and in their entirety, are really the reason we're here. And what we have received from them is a little bit like the grace of God we talk about in church all the time. What's grace? In a religious sense, it's what God gives us in forgiveness of sins, what God gives us in the sending of Christ and His sacrifice for us. It's what we don't deserve. In a larger sense, that's what grace is in general. It's what we get in life that we don't deserve, but we get it anyway. Being here in this land is a kind of grace because we didn't make it possible. Somebody else made it possible. Somebody who took the risk, made the journey. They may have done it in the last generation. They may have done it a dozen generations ago. But they did it, and their number one reason for doing it, survey says, is freedom. There are two kinds of freedom. There is physical freedom, and there's religious freedom. Physical freedom is the freedom that gives you elbow room, that gives you the opportunity to do and be the way you choose rather than the way someone else chooses. Religious freedom gives you the choice to worship. And in the Europe that so many of our ancestors left, there was not that religious freedom. And there wasn't a lot of physical freedom if you weren't part of the upper classes. I don't know what's going on in your life right now, and you don't know everything that's going on in my life. We all have things to deal with that we hadn't planned on having to deal with, and that we didn't ask for, nor do we want, yet it's part of life. Freedom will counterbalance a lot of things in life that are tough. And sometimes we have to take what we can get when we can't have everything that we want. One of the things that I want to do, while I can still remember the way back, is to ride up in the Snowbird Mountains out from Murphy. You go out 64 and head toward Chattanooga, And before you get to the Tennessee line, you turn up State Road 294, you go up to Hiawassee Dam and across the dam, and at the bottom of the hill, the pavement ends and you're on gravel roads, and you follow a little gravel road down by the creek. It finally climbs up the mountain and winds up at a place called Unicoi Gap. Actually, it's sort of the back way into Tellico. It's a long back way, but you can get there. At the top of the mountain, there's a wooden sign, unless they've replaced it. I haven't been there in 35 years, but I suspect the sign has been way down on the DOT's list of projects. A wooden sign that if you're going west says Tennessee State Line. If you're coming east on the back side of the sign, it says North Carolina State Line. The locals can take you to a place about 50 feet over in the woods, and there is a grave marker. There was a skirmish during the Civil War. Near the end of the Civil War, it was totally meaningless. It was fought over some of the most worthless, rocky terrain you could ever find in the eastern United States. But at least one soldier died in that skirmish. It was a young Union soldier from somewhere, nobody knows where. All we know about him is that there is a large flat stone, and somebody took some considerable time before that unit moved on to take a chisel and carve out his regimental and his company numbers. No name, just the numbers. I got down on my hands and knees and moved the leaves away, and then I took the palms of my hands and rubbed as much of the lichen as I could get away, and I very carefully took a piece of paper out of my pocket and I wrote down his regimental and his company numbers. Put it in my pocket, took it home. It disappeared. But I've never forgotten that moment on top of the mountain at Unicoi Gap, thinking about that soldier. Local lore says that nobody in his family ever made the journey down from Massachusetts, I believe was where his unit was from, to visit his grave. But he's a part of who I am. He's a part of who you are. He gave his life in a place that nobody should give their life fighting over. A rock pile in the Snowbird Mountains. But it happened. It's part of our heritage, part of my heritage, part of your heritage. I owe something to him. I owe something to Mary Ferree and her spunkiness and her hope to find a better life in a freer land that brought her here. All of that is a kind of grace that somebody else did for me for which I have benefited. And I didn't have anything to do with. And here I am. We have a myth in America, and it just persists. The myth of rugged American individualism. Rugged individualism doesn't get us as much as we think it does in life, because when we fall back on that, we forget what we owe to all the people who came before us, those whose names we can recollect and we can trace, and those we know nothing about. rugged individualism, to a point, it's a good thing to have. Gives us some gumption, gives us some ambition, but it's also nice to look at this country of ours with a wide-angle lens, where we see further out to the left and the right and all around us, and can appreciate everything that has made this land of ours what it is, so that we can come along and we can enjoy the blessings of the past and be blessed by the grace of everything that came before us. That's a gift to us, that we didn't do anything to inherit, to deserve, but which we inherit. Sometimes when we get down on our knees, for one reason, it's a good idea to stay on our knees a little longer and remember some other things. This is a weekend when we give thanks for those who came before us, who did all the many things in their lives that have helped make this country of ours the kind of place that we can be so glad to live in, where we enjoy number one reason, freedom. Freedom that's to be treasured, freedom that's to be savored, freedom that's to be appreciated. Freedom where you can go buy a pack of microphone covers if you have sense enough. Freedom that comes to us not in perfect form, but freedom that can be improved upon, so that when we pass it on, it's something we can be proud of, because we have put our stamp on it and made our investment in it. One of the things that just kills me to hear is, and I've said it myself, and a gang of adults get going, and you start into that conversation about how bad it is. And somebody inevitably says, and I may have said it myself, I wouldn't want to be raising a child in the time we live in. The time we live in is the only time we have. We are blessed to live in a land that most people elsewhere in the world would give their eye teeth to come to if they could. I look around at a generation of children and young people who are growing up, and in truth, I see a crowd that's probably going to do better with the future than I did. I celebrate that. I don't want to get out of here as fast as I can. I have more things to do. One of the reasons I want to stick around is to watch a new generation step forward with new ideas, new energy, new idealism to temper some of the tiredness that some of us bring to life after some decades. It is a blessing even in a world that is sometimes a tough place, to be able to live out our lives in this land with all of its potential, all of its hopes, and all of its dreams. Amen.